We have been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We have been drenched by many storms. We have learned the art of equivocation and pretense. Experience has made us suspicious of others and kept us from being truthful and open. Are we still of any use? Diethrich Bonhoeffer.
Keinem etwas zu Leide tun und von keinem ein Leid erdulden.
I think the most important thing that my uncle did was to realize from the start how evil Nazism was. Then I think how brave it was of this small group of people to think that they could fight together with other companions this monstrous machine, and that they were prepared to give their lives to do this.
You can almost sense that eventually he is going to somehow do something to put a spoke in the wheel of the Third Reich.
He could have such a very deep faith in God, even in the midst of incredible darkness.
He was so clever, and he knew so well theology, and he knew all the points in which I was a weak man. I liked chocolate, and he would bring me chocolate. He was my best friend.
Diethrich Bonhoeffer's role and Diethrich Bonhoeffer's life story just intersects an awful lot with the Nazis, the Nazi leadership, the perpetrators of the Holocaust, perpetrators of much of the crimes against humanity. And that's where, frankly, the intersect occurs with Jackson being the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial. Right. And did you find that, well, first of all, I don't know if you got into it, but what drew you to Bonhoeffer, of all people?
Well, what happened, I better take a swig of water in that. I mentioned him. See, it's hard for me to describe religious life. I belonged to the De La Salle Christian Brothers for some 20 years of my life. Now, it's hard when you say I was a religious order, it doesn't ring any bells. Like one of my fellow brothers was the actor Pete Boyle. This is not on camera, but anyway. When Pete died, he was a good friend, you know, and a great actor. Oh, God, he was funny. Oh, he was fun to live with, and he would get me in trouble. See, he has a high-pitched voice singing.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So we had 3 tenors back there, myself. Now, I'm losing my voice now, so I'm not going to give you any, ha, 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 you know. So, but anyway, he, and Hillary O'Connor, and Pete Boyle between us. You know, it's fairly big, but he had a high-pitched voice singing now. He could, his voice, speaking voice, could be anybody's voice. He'll listen to you for 5 minutes. You could go out of the room, and Pete would sit there, and he'd be Greg. You know, your voice would, he wouldn't ask the same questions. I remember one time we were singing a very high note, and you know, the choir director's directing us and all that, and then we hit the high G, Hillary and myself, and Pete's squeaking up there. And you know, they look at him and he says, "Hey, Kel, were your balls ever going to drop?" You know, so I start laughing, and the choir director stops. You think this is funny, don't you, Brother Kelly? So, thanks, Pete. You got me in trouble. God darn you! He was like that. He was good. I was in the monastery, and they had pulled me out of doctoral studies at Johns Hopkins, and I was really crushed by it. You know, because I had 1 year to go. And I was destined to be a language teacher at LaSalle College, at least I thought. But I had my master's degree in religious studies from LaSalle College, and they made me a director of postulants. you know, and subdirector of novices at the Mother House of Formation, where these young kids are coming in at age 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And I would be their spiritual director. And as a spiritual director, I had to meet every one of them. We had 40 of them. One summer, I had to meet every one of them, see, and getting them ready for the novitiate, to take the vows, or take the religious habit. And then after a year of novitiate, then they had to put the robe on and go out teaching, or they go on to the next phase of formation. So as I was going through the summer and teaching these guys how to pray, how to meditate, and I felt totally drained, like life was becoming dull, meaningless, dry, and I felt what they used to call the dark night of the soul, getting down, and well, I'm not doing any good, and I don't know what's the matter with me. I went to my spiritual director, and he said, well, the problem is you need a good spiritual reading book, you know, prime the pump, you know, get the batteries charged. He said, what are you reading now? I said, Durance's. It's a, you know, big fat volume is put you to sleep. There's nothing good about it, put me to sleep. So he said, oh, put that away. He says, go out to the library and get a good book. So I went out to the library, a brand new book just arrived, The Cost of Discipleship. So I looked, I said, well, I pull it off the shelf, and I open book to them. I always open books in the middle to see, get the flavor of it, then, you know, jump around like that. This is the wrong way to do it. So and I opened the book. We have gathered like ravens around the carcass of cheap grace. There where you have drunk of the poison that has killed the life of following Jesus among us. Wow, I said, that's me. That's what's wrong with me. There's no, Jesus isn't in my life anymore. I'm just going through the rule. You know, get up in the morning, you follow the rule, one exercise after another, you eat your time at a regular time to eat, our time to pray, go to bed at night, get up in the morning, go through the same old. I figured, geez, you know, I know what's the matter. I've lost Jesus. So that started me, and I'd have thought it was written 1964. It was I didn't know. I went to the front of the book and said, oh my God. It was translated from the German, 1937. And holy, then there's his brother-in-law, Gerhard Leibholz, whom he able to smuggle out of Germany. I never got to that in the talk. But, you know, Jewish by origins, but Christian by baptism. He wrote the memoir telling about the life of Bonhoeffer. I thought, wow, this guy's interesting. So that's how I began to read everything I could find on him. The Ethics was the next volume. Then they sent me to Europe to get a doctorate in theology. First of all, I did Lumen Vitae. See, that was International Catechetical Institute, and that was I didn't want to stay as director of postulants because I didn't feel adequate to be that kind of a spiritual guru to all these young kids. I mean, I did it. They liked me. So then I met this nun at Catholic University, and she had just come back from Lumen Vitae, and I said, yeah, that's great. What's it like over there? So she said, yeah, well, you know, we spoke French all the time. I said, wow, you speak French? And I was just close to a doctorate in French literature. So I began speaking French with her, and she says, God, you speak French fluently. I said, well, you know, yeah. He said, that's okay. She said, you ought to do Lumen Vitae. I'm thinking, click, there's my ticket out of here. You know, so they said, fine, get your doctorate at Louvain. That's how I got it. Now, in Louvain, so I had Lumen Vitae behind me. I had a master's from LaSalle. And by your second year, you have to declare what your doctoral dissertation is going to be all about, because your licentiate thesis has to be a slice of that dissertation. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be neat if I could write on Bonhoeffer? So there was a Franciscan priest, Christian Oravec, who's St. Francis Loreto now. He was president there. I think he still is president. And he did his dissertation on Bonhoeffer's ecclesiology. So we got to be talking, and I said, you know, I'd like to write on Bonhoeffer. I said, and I'm interested in Revelation theology, because I had written already articles on Revelation. He said, well, that looks like it's wide open. Why don't you put in for it? So I did, and they accepted it. So my dissertation was Diethrich Bonhoeffer's Theology of Revelation. Later it became Revelation in Christ, the Theology of Revelation, Diethrich Bonhoeffer. And that's got me long. That's the long story.
Well, that's a fascinating story. What did you find? Obviously, you went through the literature at the time. What did you see that had not been covered? I mean, a lot had been written about Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
It's not like an unknown subject. But at some point when you decided on the subject matter, what did you feel that there was a void or a vacuum that you needed to fill?
Yeah, I think part of it there's first of all a negative reaction that in the Catholic Church in which I was reared, they would speak of a deposit of revelation. It's something that looks like it's in a box, or that there's been no revelation since the death of the Apostle John, because he was alive during the days before the Ascension, so he got all that material hooked up to. I'm thinking that's not revelation, especially Bonhoeffer's book on act and being, which is a book about revelation. And like revelation, it can take on many different forms, the way God speaks to us. First of all, how do I know it's God? And then secondly, is it an act that it really hits me once and that conditions the rest of my life? Or is it being something that stays with me for the rest of my life and constantly nourishing me and rehabbing me in what God has originally said to me, so that progressively God is revealing more of who God is and revealing to me more of who I am in the eyes of God. So being. Well, Bonhoeffer had both of them. See, so, and I use that example that God encounters Moses at the burning bush. Well, that changed Moses' life. That's an act. But in order to know that it is God, God has to make sure that he knows it's the Father, God, the Father of Abraham and Isaac and Job. So he has to put Moses in a perspective, the perspective of the community of the Jewish people, so that Revelation has both aspects to it. It's the way that God interrupts our lives and can change us for the better for the rest of our life, and the way that God remains in continuity with us in a community in which we can find and nourish the Jesus Christ that's getting expression through us. So that really was, in the dissertation, that's what I found to be very important to explain. How Revelation comes to be, and using Bonhoeffer's writings with some embellishment, and then to talk about some of the aspects that are connected to a theology of revelation. How much is revelation associated with statements or definitions? See, that you circumscribe revelation so that it becomes very static. A catechism, for example, or a series of dogmatic utterances. See, so I wanted to do battle with that through using Bonhoeffer's theology, which is very dynamic. That's searching for what God would have him do and what would have him be in the period of his growth as a pastor and also as a teacher. I began to some of the writings that connected to when he taught catechism, for example. He wrote a catechism. So it's so different, and his statements when he taught this in the slums of Berlin. I don't think I got to that in today's presentation. Would have been so much more to say.
Yeah.
Not only was he an esteemed theologian, theologians in Germany, they're the hot shit, they oh, God, I remember being with Hans Pfeil, Ernst Pfeil. And he visited us. He visits me whenever he comes to the States.
Yeah.
And we're talking about his schedule and my schedule. My schedule, you teach 4 courses. And there's no assistant given me. I am who I am. And I have a secretary for the 9 different people in the department. Ernst teaches 2 courses. He has 2 graduate assistants that do all the work grading, all the other work. And he gets a sabbatical every so many years. So I'm telling him what my schedule is. And Ernst just says, und wir klagen. and we complain. So, but that's, Bonhoeffer's writings on revelation, which are the key of my doctoral dissertation, I think they're very electrifying because they're dynamic. And he asks the tough questions too.
Yeah. Speaking of tough questions, the one that seemingly always comes up, but maybe you can help me trace this. Here's a guy, principally a pacifist, and through a sense of metamorphosis.
He has pacifist leanings.
And then all of a sudden he finds himself in the Abwehr and all that conspiratorial, which you talked about. But I get a sense that there's a lot more to that story of...
Well, I could start. He never loses the peace ethic. In other words, the ideal, which has to be striven for, is peace on earth. And war is as an evil. I mean, the quotations against war, you'll never find anything like that, even from Gandhi, in all the writings of the 1930s. He's the leading exponent of statements or inspiring statements against war. I mean, you can't find anything that outdoes Bonhoeffer in that, and he's strong on it. And these are sermons, and they're courageous sermons. See, I mean, even to all those assembled people in the World Alliance of Churches. I mean, all these guys, from all around the world, that if you want to be a real church, he says, this is your mission. You can stop war. You can forbid war. So, I mean, he's very, he's challenging. Yeah. And then, statements that, that the church of today can be the false church of tomorrow, that kind of blows the whistle on the, for me anyway, for the Catholic churches, thinking that is a stranglehold on revelation and dogmatic truth. It's infallible, That you don't find that in Bonhoeffer. You have responsibility.
In your research, how deep was he into the conspiracy for the assassination of Hitler?
Oh, very much so. He was the moral backbone. See, I never got to that 14-page letter. I wanted to read that if we had another half an hour. I have a copy of it. In fact, I copied it out of the new translation. I think it's the most dramatic statement of why the conspirators had to act. And also, there's some beautiful statements in there, like, we're not Christ, but if we want to be Christian, we have to act when the hour of danger comes. And then for the first time in history, we've learned to see the events from below, from the perspective of the people that are the victims, the suffering, and so on.
Did you get a sense that it was really his brother-in-law that was driving him into this, or was it a collective?
No, I think the brother-in-law and the brother were interested in, well, there are two things to them. They wanted to save him from being arrested, because he did say he would not serve in the military of Germany. So they figured out the best way to save him was to recruit him as a double agent. We got good reasons for that. He's got ecumenical contacts, and they're going to be useful. So the papers, the original recruitment papers were, he's very useful through his ecumenical contacts, because then he can tell us who would be very favorable to the German occupation when we conquer England or conquer Czech, whatever we do, He's got all these ecumenical contacts which we can exploit. Well, that was what they stated, so that the Gestapo was always suspicious of the Abwehr. Himmler always wanted to control everything. Hitler Himmler was as much of a monster as Hitler himself. And so when they finally were able to arrest the main conspirators, and that included Bonhoeffer, von Dohnanyi, Canaris, that Gestapo was, now is our chance. Now we control everything. Even Hitler saw through that. He was very suspicious of Himmler's grab for power. And even when the assassination attempt, some of them were postponed because they couldn't get all the villains in the same area at the time. Instead of just commissioning somebody with a pistol or something to get his way in and shoot the guy. I think Larry Rasmussen said it very well. The conspiracy was a moral victory, but a technical failure. Mm-hmm. And but he was useful. Then they could use him for events. They knew that Germany was going to lose the war because they're going to make sure. So, you saw I think I tried to talk about how Franco was. Can you imagine able to steel himself against the blandishments of Adolf Hitler and all that? The way. Can you imagine the troops marching through Spain?
Yeah.
They had actually some of those that did serve in Spain in the Civil War. I met a couple of those in workshops I had gone to, And they said they were proud. They said, we were liberators. Same for the same troops that went into the Ukraine. And some of them would be tears in their eyes. They said, we were greeted as liberators. And look what happened. Then they say those damn SS people, they came in and ruined everything. They turned the people against us. We had the people throwing flowers at us. So, and in Spain, we were heroes. We liberated them from communism. And now look, they say, now look. There's a lot of frustration. I mean, these are good Germans who, I mean, they spent the war years in the army, and they realized that they were betrayed by their own leaders. So, but no, he was, then the second phase was they realized they could use him in order to undermine, they could send him on missions. In particular, they knew that the war was going to be lost once Hitler invaded Russia. The Abwehr knew that. And they were also revealing Hitler's tactics. I mean, even in the documentary on Bonhoeffer, no, it's a documentary on, no, it's on The Restless Conscience. One of the leaders in Holland said, we knew what was coming. We didn't believe them. They told us everything, but we didn't believe it. So they were revealing the plans to invade Holland. Right. And they thought it was, this double-dealing tricks of the Abwehr. But it's true that they were undermining the German war effort, the Abwehr. And they leaked the plans, and sometimes the Russians would take it seriously, and sometimes they didn't. The Allies, they knew everything. And of course the big thing, though, for the smuggling Jews out of Germany, though, that was a major operation. And that put them in mortal danger. See, and really the initial interrogations were all about Operation 7. And that poor Schmidhuber, they tortured him, and he, I felt like saying those damn Swiss, they wouldn't let them in, because their argument was, well, the Jews aren't going to get work, so you better give us a lot of foreign currency. And the Swiss, they don't come across as very benign in Operation 7. And then, of course, you had to get the foreign currency to them, and that's when Schmidhuber got arrested, and then the name of Bonhoeffer comes up, and Mueller. Joseph Mueller, oh, you would have loved to interview him. He's a lawyer. Now, you're a lawyer. Yeah. Oh, God. I interviewed him. He's twice your size. They called him the ox, and he was a marvelous specimen of human power. Yeah. We had a table between us, and he was sweating like crazy. Oh, but he was courageous. His mission, he knew Bonhoeffer very well. They shared missions together. Okay. Bonhoeffer would go up to Sigtuna to negotiate terms of surrender. He went to the Vatican. Joseph Mueller, the Vatican knew him and loved him. So he would meet with the Allies in the Vatican. But Schmidhuber got his name in the Gestapo, so he got arrested. He says, why did the Swiss have to have all that GD money? Yeah. He said, and Schmidhuber, he says, of all the people they send for this guy was a klutz. They sent him to negotiate. So that's how I got arrested, he said. And then they sent me to the Flossenburg concentration camp, where Bonhoeffer was executed. He said he knew Bonhoeffer very well. He said it's sad that he didn't survive. He said, some of the finest Germans, or some of the finest human beings you ever want to meet were murdered by Hitler in the aftermath. But he said, I was supposed to be executed. He says, the Hitler gave the order that anybody connected to the conspiracy was supposed to be executed. And he said, well, now he's telling me this, he's a huge man, with Joe Ox, I could see that. He says, they dragged me out of my cell. They stripped me naked. They tied my hands behind my back and pushed me towards the gallows. He says, he called me Chuff. They can't say Geffrey very well. Chuff, what would you do? I said, I'd shit myself. He said, yes, that's what I wanted to do. He said, no, seriously. He said, I was a lawyer. He couldn't, he's raising his hand now, he couldn't do it then. I was a lawyer, and I have a voice. I know that you have to have read the sentence of death. And he said, where are the papers? Where was the court-martial? I was not court-martialed. He was found not guilty. Then they rearrested him. because, you know, the Gestapo, they found guilty by a court. Then they rearrested him and sent him down to Flossenburg to be executed. The orders, where are the papers? Well, I demand to see the papers. No, he's with his hands behind his back, you know, gesturing with his feet and all that. Yeah. I demand to see the papers. If you are to execute me, then I want to see the result of the court. I was not court-martialed. There's no verdict. Where are the papers? You were supposed to read the sentence of death to me. Where is it? And they all, these are not educated people, you know, they're doing the dirty work. So they sent for the commandant. The commandant is adjusting his pants, asking me what's telling me. He's coming down, wagging his thing. He says, the papers are on their way. He says, all right, you prove your point. He says, now tomorrow we're going to hang you. He says, then I'll make sure you're dead. Now go, take him back to his cell. They never followed up. Wow. The papers never came. And he was liberated. He was in that transport. You know, Himmler had negotiated terms of surrender. If they could, he would give them important prisoners. You know, he's just cleaning house in Flossenburg. Nemo was one of them. He would give the Allies important prisoners in exchange for safe passage into Switzerland. So the bus load was loaded with some of these important prisoners. Mueller was one of them. Yeah. And the orders were, if it goes through, that the SS on the bus were to machine gun the prisoners, execute all of them. And he told the Allies that. Okay, so here he goes off towards, he gets captured and he commits suicide. But the Italian partisans, see, Flossenburg is that section, you know, you're very close to the Tyrol, see? And so a safe place to transport would be into the Italian Tyrol, okay? So, but the Italian partisans, they ambushed the bus, pulled the SS off and killed the SS people, and they were free, just like that. Imagine coming that close. Yeah. As a lawyer, you might be able to do it. I'd be shitting myself.
I'd be right there. And it just, I find it just the irony of how Bonhoeffer and his brother-in-law were actually caught because of the way you described it. Yeah. Really through not what you would have thought.
This dumb things. They tried to hide things while the Gestapo were there. And it was between Oster and von Donani. There was a bit of a piece of paper that had some incriminating evidence, and the Gestapo saw them pass it to be destroyed, and they got it. And so that, you know, then they arrested them, and then the interrogations began. They knew that they couldn't prove, they didn't have the absolute proof. They just knew that they were involved. So that you have Bonhoeffer using all the wiles, you know, as a naive professor, over his head, playing the role, and von Donani also saying he was a loyal servant. He was running the agency. The Operation 7 was really to counter all this vicious anti-government propaganda. So they put on a good face, and but the Gestapo knew they were lying through their teeth. Yeah. See, and they kept digging and digging, and finally they found the Zosen papers. Now, the Zosen papers were records that the Abwehr kept. I think earlier, Canaris had said to Donani, destroy them. But he didn't destroy them. You know why they didn't destroy them? Well, remember, after the war, Nazis, anybody connected with Nazi Germany was arrested, put on trial. Mm-hmm. Nuremberg might be one. Yeah. Do you think Canaris would have been one of those, the head of the military intelligence? Mm-hmm. So they wanted to prove, they had proof, documentary proof, that they were actually working against Nazi Germany. This was their ticket free after the war. Yeah. But the Gestapo had, that was the incriminating. And that really, all those who were hanged on the same day as Bonhoeffer, Guerra, Zach, Donani, not Donani, he was executed. They had to carry him to the gallows. Oster and the Canaris. And they were, and of course Bonhoeffer, there were 7 of them executed. Mm-hmm. And then of course von Donani, because he felt he wouldn't survive the interrogations, he had his wife infect him with diphtheria germs, so that he could be too ill to be interrogated, and he wouldn't therefore under torture he wouldn't be able to reveal all that he knew. But they had the papers, see.
Sure.
And they carried him on a stretcher to the gallows to kill him. And then they said, I know one documentary had them being hanged with piano wire. That happened to the generals in Berlin. And that was filmed, but not in Flossenburg. They wanted to get that over with and get drunk. That was...
The actual interrogations, was Freisler involved in those interrogations?
No. Manfred Rüder. Freisler was really monstrous in his acting as the head judge in these trials, because he did something in Germany which would never be allowed in the United States or in most civilized countries. He would take time out to insult the prisoners and try to make them feel traitorous, and calling them like a filthy louse. And I mean, it was a terrible ordeal for those that faced Freisler. The one that seemed to hold his own was Count Helmut James von Moltke. See, it's a fascinating person, and a colleague of Bonhoeffer. He was the one that went with Bonhoeffer to Norway, ostensibly to calm things down for the German occupation, but in reality to tell the Norwegian church, the bishops there, keep it up. Tell the world, make Norway an example to the world of the evils of the Nazi occupation.
Just out of curiosity, did Bonhoeffer and the head of the Nazi German church, Müller, ever connect?
Ludwig Müller. He despised Müller.
Did he?
Yeah.
But did they ever talk? Did you have any indication that they...
Except through intermediaries. No. He mobilized against Müller. He tried to get him not elected to be the head bishop. Hitler's master plan was to have a united church under Ludwig Müller, and of course united government under Adolf Hitler. And whereas Bonhoeffer worked they called themselves Young Reformers. They worked the church elections, but it was useless because the elections were rigged. And but to intermediaries, those that were supporters of Ludwig Müller would write letters telling Bonhoeffer, look, if you go to England, you're not allowed to speak against the government. We want you to sign a paper saying you will not speak ill of this German government. He refused to sign it. See, so you have to look at the correspondence with the lesser church leaders. But Müller he disgusted the Nazis, so he was so heavy-handed and so sycophantic that I think even the Nazis realized they made a poor choice. And he had no leadership qualities, except he was a loyal Nazi. So.
You've had a chance to talk about, read about, you pretty much, that's become your alter ego. It's a career. It's a professional career.
To ask that principal question, a Christian shall not kill, which is true, but there are times you are responsible for human beings around you. And you have to try to think about all means to stop that man who is killing.
Diese beiden Punkte, Krieg und Judenverfolgung, also Ungerechtigkeit, das waren die Punkte, die Bonhoeffer bewogen hat, sich dem Widerstand anzuschließen. Denn es war ja so, gerade der gegenwärtige Christus, gerade Gott in Christus, ist ja ein Gott des Friedens und ein Gott der Gerechtigkeit. Und man wird ihm nicht gerecht, wenn man eben eine laxe Auffassung vom Krieg hat und von der Gerechtigkeit. Und ich glaube, dass das für einen Mann wie Bonhoeffer ganz klar war. Und er hat ja auch deutlich gesagt, hat auch an Eberhard Bethge geschrieben, ich bereue diesen Weg an keiner Stelle.
Bonhoeffer's role in the resistance was more as an emissary between the core resistors and the Allied forces to get terms of surrender. He was also the moral backbone of the German resistance. They looked to him for moral guidance to help them overcome some of the scruples that they had, because in most instances they had to violate their military oath. They had to lie, they had to be duplicitous, they had to plan murder, they had to kill the head of state. And Bonhoeffer certainly provided a moral inspiration to them.
Family taken in March 1943 at Karl Bonhoeffer's 75th birthday, where you have the entire family assembled. And if you look at the faces of the conspirators, these are the faces of people that are really struggling to remain true to their principles and to do what they think is right, not knowing whether it's going to succeed, and not even knowing if it succeeded, if history will judge them right or not.
At that same gathering, the von Dohnanyi group awaited word that a bomb they had planted on a plane had succeeded in killing Hitler. But the bomb failed to detonate. On April 5, 1943, Gestapo agents arrived at Abwehr headquarters and arrested Hans von Dohnanyi. Papers in his desk led to Diethrich Bonhoeffer.
At about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Dietrich's father came from the number 43 to the 42 and said, Dietrich, there are 2 gentlemen who wanted to speak to you. You must come over. And so Dietrich went over, of course, always in total discipline, being prepared that something like that one day will happen, and now it happened.
I didn't know then, but from that moment, she wrote every day a letter to him in her diary. On the 5th of April, when Diethrich was taken in prison, in this diary are the words, Dear Diethrich, has something bad happened? I feel it's something very bad. But she didn't know.
Bonhoeffer was taken to Tegel prison in Berlin. The blanket he was given was so dirty that for days he refused to use it. Yet he wrote to his parents that he was well and expected to be released shortly.
I want you to be quite sure that I am all right. Strangely enough, the discomforts that one generally associates with the prison life, the physical hardship, hardly bother me at all. You can imagine that I am most particularly anxious about my fiancée at this moment. It is a great deal for her to bear. Here in the prison yard, there is a thrush that sings beautifully in the morning. Your Diethrich.
When I saw him first time, I didn't know how to behave. I thought, how shall I now? What shall I make? What a kind of face should I make when he comes in? But when he came in, he was just as he always was, friendly, smiling, and making that first seeing again each other very easy.
Over time, Bonhoeffer befriended several of the prison guards. Their assistance enabled Bonhoeffer to exchange correspondence and books with family and friends. The family devised a coding system within the books as a way to confirm each other's stories for the interrogations.
They actually communicated by, I think, every second page, or maybe every page, but I think most likely every second page, they put under one letter a little dot with a pencil. You know, and you would have to really look at it. And so the books were allowed to be sent in and to be to get back from the prison. So there was one letter, an E, a little dot under the E, then maybe a page later or 2 pages later, I don't know exactly how it was, the pattern, then another one letter. So you had a whole book for a few sentences, you see. And this was, of course, pretty clever. And they had time to know exactly how they would communicate because they knew they were in danger.
The interrogations must have been terrible. They were tortured. Klaus Bonhoeffer, before he died, wrote to his wife and said, "I can go through anything. I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be interrogated again." I think that the ugliness and depravity and brutality of the Nazis and the knowledge that Bonhoeffer and other members of his family had about what was really going on would have done many people in, would have simply immobilized them. And one of the most remarkable things for me is how he doesn't become paralyzed, how he continues to try again and again and again. Not just to do the right thing, but to think about what this really means in the long term, in the universal sense for his church.
One of the things that Bonhoeffer was trying to do in prison was to write a book. We have the outline of that book. It's there in the papers from prison, but we don't have much of the material. What we do have is correspondence between him and Eberhard Bethge, his friend, about the book that he was writing.
Bonhoeffer wrote to Bethge, "The church is the church only when it exists for others. It must share in the secular problems of ordinary life, and it must tell men of every calling what it means to live in Christ."
It goes back to the whole question of the other. You see, religion had become a very individualistic thing as a result of the Enlightenment, and a thing between you and God, okay? And something that you kept separate from politics. That's what it was, and that's not what Christianity is about.
Diethrich was already 3 months in prison when for the first time Maria was allowed to see him. But the judge wanted to be present, and they only told him 1 minute before when he came in, and Maria came from the other side. And they were taught to sit down on a little sofa and not to touch, and to talk loudly so that the others could understand what they talked. And so after half an hour, I can't imagine what they talked, but perhaps not so important things. Then each of them had to go out. Diethrich at the one door, and Maria at the other door. And when they arrived at the doors, Maria turned on her heels and ran to him before anybody could stop her and put her arms round his neck.
One of my predecessors here has scribed over the cell door, "In 100 years it will be over." I am reading the Bible straight through from cover to cover, and I have just got as far as Job, which I am particularly fond of. I read the Psalms every day, as I have for years. I know them and love them more than any other book.
As the war continued into 1944, Bonhoeffer became more and more resigned to his situation. Again, he began working on his book, Ethics.
One of the things he says in Ethics is that the old kind of ethics doesn't work anymore, that the rules have changed so radically under Nazism that the only thing someone can do really is throw themselves on the mercy of God and do what they think is right and follow it through. And that's what you see him doing.
On July 20th, 1944, the resistance launched its final attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg carried a bomb contained in a briefcase into a meeting with Hitler and his generals in East Prussia. Von Stauffenberg armed the device in a room next to the meeting, but was able to activate only half the explosives in the case.
When Stauffenberg walked into the room, he asked an aide to place him near Hitler so that he could follow everything that was being said, because his hearing was somewhat impaired through having been wounded in North Africa. And he was placed about 2 persons away from Hitler. It seems that after he had left, someone shoved the briefcase further under the table, under the great map table, which was had a very heavy tabletop. And that may have protected Hitler somewhat.
The bomb destroyed the bunker, killing many of the officers. But Hitler was only wounded.
After the explosion, and after Hitler had survived the explosion, Hitler was, of course, at first furious, then elated, then furious again. But he was very much elated, and he said, it's a miracle, I've survived, I'm invulnerable.
Hitler vowed to kill all the members of the conspiracy. The fate of von Dohnanyi and Bonhoeffer was effectively sealed.
Who am I? I have been told that I suffer the days of misfortune with serenity, smiles and pride, as someone accustomed to victory. Am I really what others say about me? Or am I only what I know of myself? Bedeviled by anxiety, awaiting great events that might never occur, fearfully powerless and worried for friends far away, weary and empty in prayer, thinking, doing, weak, and ready to take leave of it all. Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, you know me. Oh God, you know I'm yours.
By April 1945, Berlin was in total ruin. Despite the fact the war was lost, the order was given to kill the remaining members of the resistance group, including Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was moved south to Flossenbürg concentration camp. Upon arriving, he was brought before a court-martial. Witnesses say he did not offer a defense for himself. He was found guilty and condemned to death. On the morning of April 9, 1945, Diethrich Bonhoeffer was marched naked to the gallows and hanged. He said, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life."
What's Bonhoeffer mean to you, perhaps, and to you individually, and then maybe what's the bigger meaning here?
It's changed my life, really. And as far as teachers, my students they get very excited about Bonhoeffer. And a lot of them are engaged in things that they wouldn't otherwise get engaged in. One student, Larry Pignon, in fact, I have 2 students that went to jail as peace activists. Another one that went down to Fort Benning to protest against the School of Assassins, that's all, they're influenced by Bonhoeffer. And one went to jail for Ann Bennis. I tried to talk her out of it. She said she won't. She showed me her income tax form. I said, Ann, you can't send that in. She says, I refuse to put any money toward the military. I says, Ann, you're going to get arrested. She says, why don't you just pay the stuff? And her father is a wealthy it was his oil company up in Philadelphia. I'm thinking, she's estranged from the father, and he wouldn't have anything to do with her. He wouldn't even pay her bail. And she was pregnant, besides. She had gotten married to Bill, who was another one, who went to jail, but then he got out. They took turns going to jail. So I said, you can't do it. He said, no, I stick by my guns. And I said, okay, all right, I admire you, but I said, I don't think it's... Then she realized when she got to jail, she was pregnant, and she felt that the jailhouse swill would not be good for the baby. So she finally caved and paid her taxes and got right with the government. I never told her, I told you so.
Yeah, yeah.
But Larry Pagnon was arrested. He was one of those that floated the banner on General Electric building in, outside Philadelphia.
Yep.
And he got arrested for peace activism. And he's a I guess a black belt karate. I didn't know that. He's working in he has a AIDS hospice up in New York. And that's all, that's part of the legacy of Bonhoeffer. He feels he's got the energy, the money, and he's willing to do something that helps the poor.
Right.
The statements of Bonhoeffer on the poor are extraordinary. Even in the ethics, that statement I read, it's just proud. It's almost out of the blue. He says, that he's trying to make the point of the conspiracy, but also, why was Hitler so popular? Because the poor were left adrift, and Hitler just moved right into the gap.
This is perhaps the most important letter to me, which he wrote on the 21st of July, the day after the plot had failed, 44. I discovered later, and I'm still discovering right up to this moment, that is it only by living completely in this world that one learns to have faith. By this worldliness, I mean living unreservedly in life's duties, problems, successes, and failures. In so doing, we throw ourselves completely into the arms of God, taking seriously not our own sufferings, but those of God in the world. That, I think, is faith.
So anyway, the repercussions on people, it's hard to predict because there's so many that read his life story or have seen the documentary film, right, and they're inspired. There's something about him. I mean, if he had stayed in America and died in his bed, the fact that he died, same for Martin Luther King too, the fact he was assassinated makes all the difference. It's almost Oscar Romero, a bookworm, but the martyrs of the 20th century. And incidentally, when Westminster Abbey decided to fill those vacant, 10 niches with martyrs of the 20th century, it's interesting the ones they picked out. Oscar Romero, Martin Luther King, Diethrich Bonhoeffer, and the Franciscan who starved himself to death, replacing a prisoner with family. Yeah. So there are 10 of them, and it's a very inspiring story.
If there's one book that Bonhoeffer wrote that's been compiled on his words, what would you recommend to somebody? So the guy who comes in off the spaceship and say, "Here, you need to know about Diethrich Bonhoeffer," what would you give him?
Discipleship.
Yeah.
Discipleship. And because I'm one of the editors, my co-author is dead now. The co-editor is John Godsey, beautiful person. He died last year of a stroke. It would be discipleship, but you'd still need some explanation there. You need the life story. The life story is inspiring. Mm-hmm. Now the biography is this thick. It's a little thicker than that book. You can't give the biography and say, here. There are shorter versions of it. A Testament to Freedom. My other book is very thin. Liberating Faith, Bonhoeffer's Message for Today. That's a thin book. And now the book Reading Bonhoeffer, that's thin too. I don't think they sold many copies of it, but there it is. Yeah.
This has been outstanding. I know you must be tired after getting prepared.
Oh, I get energized.
I can see this, and I love your passion. It just kind of jumps out.
Yeah, it's an inspiration. I have to say that.